Some bee stings make werewolves feel like they have it easy. These horror transformations might end up haunting your nightmares. John Landis's An American Werewolf in London is an effortless melange of broad comedy and sheer terror. The whole thing comes together in a transformation sequence that evokes both awe and sorrow. David Kessler is a good kid. Losing his best friend to a lycanthrope in the moors of Yorkshire is punishment enough. Getting turned into a murderous monster is cruel beyond belief. When the fateful full moon arrives, Kessler tries to take his mind off the impending horror by watching darts. Bad Moon Rising starts to play. Then, the hunger hits. David's metamorphosis runs a little over 2 minutes in total, which feels like an eternity. Viewers feel every excruciating elongation of hair and limbs, but it's the bone-cracking protrusion of David's jaw that drives home the pain of becoming. The fact that Landis opts to score this torture to Sam Cooke's Velvety Blue Moon is the cherry on top. Rick Baker's groundbreaking effects work, much of which was shot in reverse, begat a generation of like-minded gorehounds. But the majority of his acolytes never matched his empathy. He thought through every second of David's unearned agony, which pays off with the film's soul-crushing final shot. John Fawcett and Karen Walton's coming-of-age horror flick Ginger Snaps sees two codependent sisters, Bridget and Ginger Fitzgerald, struggle to navigate the social world of high school in Bailey Downs. Also, Ginger is slowly transforming into a werewolf. At first, Ginger's newfound abilities make her feel powerful and in control of her own destiny for the first time in her life. But as the monster inside her grows stronger, her transformation grows increasingly grotesque. By the time Halloween rolls around, Ginger's facial structure has morphed to become progressively more wolf-like, as she soon loses any semblance of humanity and fully wolfs out. Ginger Snaps opted for a practical wolf transformation sequence, filled with pulsing veins, cracking bones, painful facial mutations, and extended gnarled limbs. Ginger's transformation looks absolutely agonizing, but the true tragedy is watching Bridget desperately try to find her sister underneath the fanged mouth and white fur. Her transformation isn't just a sign that she's become a monster, it's that she's beyond saving, and her loving sister will have to kill her to prevent further misery.
I'm not dying in this room with you!
Body horror master David Cronenberg's The Fly has one of the most grotesque movie monster transformations of all time. The film follows Jeff Goldblum as the brilliant but strange scientist Seth Brundle, who experiences a horrifying mutation after an experiment goes awry. In an attempt to operate an invention that allows teleportation between pods, Brundle gets caught in a tragic accident after a housefly gets trapped in the device. Throughout the film, Brundle's DNA begins to hideously merge with the insect, causing a gradual transformation that depicts his blood-curdling evolution into Brundlefly. The scientist grapples with his gradual loss of humanity and the terrifying physical changes he's forced to undergo as he helplessly becomes a monster of his own making. Of course, the goriest moment of them all is at the end, when Brundle's skin peels off to reveal an unnatural creature inside him. It's unforgettable, hard to watch, and undeniably iconic. Brundlefly might be a little outlandish, but it's a reminder of how body horror is easily one of the scariest horror subgenres there is. After all, you can run away from a guy in a hockey mask, but you can't run away from yourself. Now an adult, Anthony McCoy has no memory of his time as an infant in Candyman's lair, but he finds himself drawn to the legend and the grounds of Cabrini Green. While touring the empty housing project, he's stung on the hand by a bee, beginning his transformation by summoning the murderous ghost in a mirror. The skin of his hand rots and peels with a blistering infection that spreads from the bee sting up his arm and throughout his body. Laundromat owner William Burke completes the conversion by sawing off Anthony's hand and jamming a rusty hook into the stump. He has become the new Candyman. Though Anthony's metamorphosis is horrifying, the film's allegory terrifies on a deeper level. Simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, Anthony finds himself turned into a monster by a dominant culture that fears him. As he learns more about his community's history, he is consumed by the dehumanizing narrative. Even more horrific are the shadow puppet recreations of actual events in American history, in which real black men have been transformed into boogeymen to fit a narrative built to uphold white supremacy. Some transformation sequences are terrifying because of how realistic they seem. Others, like the one from The Beast Within, are made utterly nightmarish thanks to how surreal they are. There's nothing logical happening on an anatomic or medical level when young Michael McCleary succumbs to his genetic destiny. He transforms into a version of the creature that raped his mother some 17 years prior. Whether the creature that was Michael's father was a mutant cicada or not, the film doesn't seem to be sure. Michael's final form looks generically monstrous, with no obvious insect-like attributes. However, there's no denying that his transformation into the beast is genuinely upsetting.
Kill me or you won't be able to stop him! Kill me! Kill me! Kill me!
Clemens writhes and spits violently during the event, the skin-stretching bladder effects making his head pulsate while a puppet creature is occasionally inserted between cuts. Most disturbingly, the crowd of people surrounding Michael stand silently and watch him, barely reacting beyond their general expressions of shock and horror. It's an example of how 80s horror puts such an intense emphasis on makeup effects that moments like these could be made far more bizarre and impactful than they would be otherwise. Some movie monster transformations are relatively quick, while other films like John Watts' 2014 body horror, Clown, prefer to let the evolution fester rather than explode. The main character of Clown, Ken, is a doting father who puts on an old clown costume for his son's birthday, but he soon discovers it can't be removed. The red nose and fake hair fuse to his body, but that's not the end of the change. The longer Kent is incorporated into the suit, the more erratic his behavior becomes, unearthing a primal hunger that makes his transformation less and less sympathetic as time goes on. The only way to live is to become a monster in the metaphorical sense, as well as a literal one. Actor Andy Powers handles the grim emotional arc with ease, supported by gradual prosthetic and makeup work that showcases the funny man's deteriorating flesh as the laughs die down. Never judge a book by its cover, or as one thrilling vignette in Trick or Treat proves, never judge a princess by her dress. Laurie is the youngest of 4 young women in revealing fairy tale costumes headed to a Halloween party in a remote pasture. Dressed as Little Red Riding Hood, she's nervous about her first time and is determined to find the right date. Unbeknownst to her, the man she chooses is a serial killer stalking the town's revelers.
My, what big eyes you have.
Before Laurie can become his next victim, the wannabe vampire crashes to the ground next to the party's raging bonfire, and he's not alone. The field is littered with incapacitated men lying helpless at their date's feet. The women remove their sexy attire only to rip off their true costumes, werewolves in disguise. They devour their dates under the light of the full moon. It's an intensely cathartic and empowering sequence, in which the audience realizes the wolves have been using cultural perceptions of feminine helplessness to hunt for men in plain sight. The 1990 adaptation of Roald Dahl's dark fantasy novel about a young boy stumbling into a witch convention is about as creepy can get. The Witches is teeming with near-grotesque transformations of ordinary-looking women into supernatural beings. The film wonderfully controls its themes of dark comedy while consistently keeping up with its ghastly atmosphere. Angelica Houston is flawless as the Grand High Witch. The film's storyline is eerie to its core, and the climactic moments where everything blows to hell are a sight for sore eyes. Multiple transformations will send chills down your spine, but it's the conclusion that best displays how crazy this movie is, when the witches transform into mice. Their dinner party goes wrong, when a potion causes their ears to protrude, their bellies to swell, and whiskers to appear on their faces before they all turn into rodents. It's somehow hilarious and disturbing at the same time.
I'm not finished with you yet, oh woman!
While the Indiana Jones films are widely recognized as being masterpieces of action-adventure, they often don't get enough credit for their horrific elements. This is especially true for the moments of comeuppance enacted upon their villainous characters, with the most disturbing fates reserved for the chief baddies. While having your face melted by the power of God or being eaten alive by crocodiles would certainly be no picnic, the most insidious punishment for an indie villain occurs in The Last Crusade. Nazi collaborator Walter Donovan meets his end when he drinks holy water from a cup that is not the Holy Grail. Upon drinking from the wrong cup, Donovan begins to rapidly age, his hair growing as his skin dries up and shrinks. He crumbles and sinks into his bones as he turns into a skeleton, swiftly crumbling into dust.
He chose poorly.
The scene plays upon everyone's fear of aging, both naturally and before their time. It also joins the pantheon of 80s transformation sequences where a captive audience is present, as Donovan's changing hands hold tight to the duplicitous Elsa. The icing on the terrifying cake lies in the fact that Donovan is moaning and shouting in fear the whole time, meaning he's all too aware of what's happening to him. That's what you get for helping Nazis, folks. The Academy may have preferred an American Werewolf in London, but Joe Dante's film from the same year, The Howling, is no slouch in the transformation department. The film's werewolves were designed by none other than Rob Bottin, a protege of American Werewolf makeup master Rick Baker. Bottin's use of pulsating air bladders and extendable false faces is just as impressive and innovative as Baker's designs, making the film's main transformation scene a sterling example of body horror. The moment where Eddie Quist transforms into a killer wolf right in front of Karen White is made as disturbing as humanly possible. Shot by cinematographer John Hora in shadowy, dangerous blacks, the scene is a literal showstopper. Eddie forces Karen, and by extension the audience, to watch every bone stretch, every hair grow, and every fang extend. It pays off the character's conflation of the psychosexual with the supernatural. In this way, the transformation acts as a visual assault before it turns into a physical one, the werewolf equivalent of a killer showing his victim his weapon before using it. Surgical horror is a rare and taboo corner of the body horror subgenre. Something about the juxtaposition between a life-saving procedure and the malicious intent to disfigure and deform has the unique power to disturb and horrify. No film is a better example of this than Kevin Smith's Tusk. After a life of extreme trauma, eccentric madman Howard Howe becomes obsessed with recreating the walrus that once saved his life. He kidnaps and deforms callous podcaster Wallace Brighton, amputating his limbs and sewing him into a walrus suit made of human skin. The dismembered and sharpened bones of his own legs serve as the tusks implanted into his mouth. It's a hideous, almost comical sight. Long's soulful eyes are still recognizably human, even through the massive amounts of disfiguring stitchwork crisscrossing his face. Not only will he have to live with the pain his surgical wounds have caused, but his mental state collapses as he begins to really see himself as a walrus. Though Wallace manages to kill his captor, the damage has already been done. He is forced to live out the rest of his days as a human trapped in the hideous creation of a psychopath. There are no movie monster transformations quite like the one in Shinya Tsukamoto's Tetsuo, the Iron Man. The 1989 Japanese low-budget cult classic follows two men as they transform into living machines and battle it out. The plot to Tetsuo is practically non-existent. Instead, it feels more like a fever dream as flesh becomes metal, in increasingly violent and sexually deviant sequences. Tetsuo is an experimental film that transforms its main characters from humans into sexual cyborgs with grotesque growths and bizarrely replaced body parts. Hands become blades, faces become a mess of machinery, genitals become power drills. It's surreal stuff made more horrifying by grainy black and white footage and handcrafted practical special effects. While many of the other transformations on this list are slimy and sticky, this one is uncomfortably crunchy. The whole transformation begins with the eccentric metal fetishist jamming a metal rod into his leg, letting the audience know early on that this metal metamorphosis will be a gruesome one. David Cronenberg's 2022 sci-fi feature Crimes of the Future features the chaotic flesh parades that the Canadian director has become known for. But it's his 1983 science fiction head trip Videodrome that comes up the most in conversations about monstrous movie transformations. UHF station president Max Wren undergoes some visceral changes as he investigates a mysterious snuff show called Videodrome. But as Debbie Harry's Nikki Brand tells him,
"But that's only the beginning. The beginning of the new flesh."
The new flesh turns out to be a horrifying amalgamation of technology and man, displayed in a gooey sequence among many that still repels audiences today. Wren pulls a handgun from an organic slit in his stomach and watches in awe as the weapon embeds itself into his hand and forearm. The scene, along with the entire movie, is a repulsive yet erotic exploration of sex and violence in media, and its effect on the viewer's reality. Long live the new flesh. John Carpenter's 1982 film The Thing is an adaptation of the 1938 novella Who Goes There by John W. Campbell Jr. It follows a group of Antarctic researchers struggling to survive against a non-human organism that attacks, kills, and imitates its hosts. The nature of Carpenter's Thing means there's plenty of gnarly transformations during the 109-minute runtime. Dogs become grotesque, tentacles slither into orifices, and grown men split in twain. The wildest metamorphosis among them is that of Norris, who suffers a heart attack and reacts rather poorly to its treatment. Upon defibrillation, Norris's chest opens into a gaping maw that bites off the good doctor's arms. What emerges is one of the ugliest monsters to grace the big screen, and some of the most exquisite practical effects to do the same. Creature designer Rob Bottin used an array of substances to achieve his vision, from creamed corn to microwaved bubblegum. It worked to fulfill Carpenter's vision of a shape-shifting monstrosity, an uncanny abomination that defies belief. James Gunn's Slither is a loving homage to 70s and 80s horror, an aspect best illustrated by the fate of Michael Rooker's Grant. Infected by an extraterrestrial parasite, Grant begins gradually transforming into a hybrid creature whose sole purpose is to infect and transform every living thing into more of itself. While Grant's transformation is gradual, it's still gooey and grotesque, with artist Todd Masters responsible for blending Rooker's features with slimy, organic-looking prosthetics. Even more disturbing is the fate of those Grant chooses to become breeding receptacles for his slug-like progeny. As poor Brenda demonstrates, such victims remain alive during the process and are eventually torn apart by the writhing slugs inside them. Grant's final form is a mass of writhing bodies and tentacles that look both menacing and disturbingly sexual, indicating Grant's purpose on Earth is about more than just a threat of death. Most body transformations in horror films have an element of sexual anxiety, and the creature's design in Slither is no different, keeping things horrific even when the film itself is going for comedy. Jennifer Check has spent her entire life being the hottest girl in Devil's Kettle, which is perhaps what makes her transformation into a monster all the more terrifying. The wannabe rock band Low Shoulder tries and fails to sacrifice Jennifer to the devil in exchange for fame and fortune. As a result, Jennifer slowly transforms into a boy-eating succubus with the ability to unhinge her jaw, grow sharp teeth, and consume anyone who crosses her. Before she fully comes to terms with what's happening to her, she vomits black sludge, her teeth slowly begin to rot, and her hair grows limp and weak. When Jennifer learns she can combat the visible signs of decay by feeding on men, she becomes more powerful than ever before. Jennifer is the definition of the monstrous feminine, and that her transformation is most terrifying for those that get in her way. Even when she's devouring raw meat and spitting blood, Jennifer Check is still the hottest girl in Devil's Kettle, and that's what makes her so dangerous. With his 2018 surrealist dark comedy Sorry to Bother You, writer-director Boots Riley has some inconvenient truths to deliver. That's partially what the film's title is about. Not only is it commonly used by telemarketers as they make sales calls at the most unsuitable times, but the phrase captures the cumbersome feeling that comes with delivering those earth-shattering truths. In the film's case, The Bother is a feature-length interrogation of capitalism, and how easily it commodifies its laborers. Refract that through Riley's unapologetic magical realism, and the message calls for an unforgettable visual depiction of a dystopian workforce through the animal most associated with labor, the horse. A corporate workforce's transition from man to equisapien in the movie isn't presented with the same tonal terror of a werewolf transformation. However, there's still something truly repugnant about such an extreme version of slave labor.
So you making half human, half horse things so you can make more money?
Yeah, basically.
As far as monstrous transformations go, few are more visually and conceptually terrifying than a murderous sex fiend made up of a growing amalgamation of bone, flesh, veins, and goo. It's a rare monster whose moral depravity matches or exceeds his inhuman exterior. Legendary Japanese special effects artist Yoshihiro Nishimura directed Tokyo Gore Police, and nearly every single shot makes use of his transformative talents. The movie is set in a near-future dystopian version of Japan, where a mad scientist has created a virus that mutates people into monstrous mutants called engineers. In order to combat the engineers, a special squad of the Tokyo police force hunts them down, including the mysterious and vengeful Ruka. Ruka dispatches the engineers with ease, but ends up infected by the mad scientist and begins her own transformation. Tokyo Gore Police is a movie about a virus that causes severe mutations, so it contains too many disgusting transformations to possibly mention. Among them is a woman who becomes half snail, another whose lower limbs turn into a massive pair of reptile jaws, and an amputee with swords for arms and legs. Ruka's own change is less extreme, but she still ends up with a claw for an arm and a big demonic-looking eye. Tokyo Gore Police isn't for everyone, but it's perfect for fans of disgusting transformations. As the son of Lon Chaney, Hollywood's celebrated man of 1,000 faces, Lon Chaney Jr.'s transformation from Larry Talbot to the Wolfman had to be something special. Realizing this, makeup effects artist Jack Pierce did the counterintuitive thing and underplayed the shift from man to beast. This placed the onus on Chaney Jr., who'd proven himself as an actor with his hugely sympathetic portrayal of Lenny in Louis Milestone's 1939 adaptation of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. When the full moon hits, Talbot flees for home, hoping the sorceress's prophecy is little more than old-world balderdash. Talbot frantically paces his flat and examines himself in a mirror. Same old Larry. He briefly beams with relief until he senses something not quite right with his feet. He sits and peels off one sock, and then another. Furry as all get out. After a series of dissolves, his feet are entirely wolf. Director George Wagner abruptly cuts to the moors, where the viewer finally sees Chaney in full monstrous makeup. The audience feels both terror and pity, thanks to Chaney's devastating realization that he is a doomed man. The world of ballet revolves around transforming the body into a picture of impossible perfection. But as Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan shows, the truth behind this dainty facade can be terrifying. Natalie Portman's Nina is a veteran dancer hoping for the lead in a new production of Swan Lake. Pulled between her manipulative mother and egotistical director, she becomes obsessed with embodying the two sides of the Swan Queen. The white swan is pristine, delicate, and docile, while the wild black swan is guided by impulse and desire. As opening night approaches, Nina finds herself pushed past her limits, desperately seeking the dichotomy of imperfect perfection. The black swan takes over, putting her body through a hideous transformation. Nina's legs crack and bend, her eyes fill with blood, and she begins to sprout feathers from her arms and back. Even though it's only in her mind, this metamorphosis helps her deliver the performance of a lifetime. Moviegoers were still marveling at the advent of the talkie when director Ruben Mamoulian knocked them sideways with one of the most astonishing monster transformations in film history. When Frederick Marsh's mild-mannered Dr. Henry Jekyll bolts down a drug cocktail designed to draw out the beast he believes resides inside every man, Mamoulian frames the actor in agonizing close-up. As Jekyll writhes in pain, the camera pans down to his right hand. It darkens. When the camera pans back up, Jekyll's thin eyebrows are bushier, his hair thicker, and most alarmingly, his teeth, well, they're fangier. The camera then dives down to his left hand, which turns incredibly hairy. By the time the camera returns to Jekyll's face, he is Mr. Hyde, a snarling monster of a man, capable of unthinkable evil. Mamoulian lets us gape for a second before directing Marsh to look directly at the camera. Mamoulian refused for decades to reveal the secrets of the transformation. When he did, it was a shockingly simple combination of filters and contrastingly colored makeup, all of which was concealed when captured on black and white film stock. The effect is still seamless and utterly terrifying. Free! Free at last! Sometimes, settling into a social group requires transformation, but in Starry Eyes, Sarah takes that concept a little too far. An aspiring actress in Los Angeles, Sarah gets stuck working a soul-sucking restaurant gig with friends who treat her as disposable when she's offered the chance to become a part of the Hollywood elite at the cost of her actual soul. She reluctantly agrees and begins one of cinema's most gruesome transformations. After being infected by evil in a semi-coerced sexual act with a high-powered producer, Sarah's body begins to change. The movie shifts from an unpleasant psychological and social horror story into pure body horror as her hair and nails begin to fall out. Her skin turns a sickly greenish shade, and she starts vomiting maggots. Eventually, she goes into a kind of cocoon and emerges as a pale, flawless, hairless version of herself with glowing green eyes. But was it worth the journey there? Who's to say?